Well, now when I call myself a Christian, I have a better understanding of what that means. It's not just, oh, that's where I go every Sunday. I mean, that's what he does on his weekends as far as, what God he's praying to. It's kind of just helped me with how to make decisions about things, like how I need to respond and react. And do I get it right all the time? No, but I have a guide. I mean, and some things, when you read the Bible, it's like, well, what's this really talking about? But the things that on a day-to-day basis, it has made clear, like, how I should live my life. And again, I'm not perfect. I don't always follow it, but I have a reference. So I am a Christian. God made me. He stitched me together. He wired me. He knows, how I act, how I think is what he intended, but he's making me more of what he intended me to be before I was born into sin. So I'm now becoming more of the George he intended to be. Well, my name's George McMillan. I am a home health physical therapist in Columbus, Georgia, but I live in Alabama. I grew up as a Navy brat, so I've moved around quite a bit, but when I finally found work as a PT, it's brought me down here, and I've been down here the last, it'll be 15 years next March.
Okay. And how did you come to know Jesus? What was some of the background behind that?
So, my family, my mom and dad, they took me and my brothers to church, because we were moving around so much. It was hard to be consistent in a church, and, we didn't always have one to go to because we just couldn't find one because we were moving frequently. When my dad retired and we finally settled down, we were going to a Presbyterian church, and I grew up going, but it was never really a part of my life. It was just something I did growing up. Just jumping ahead, I kind of, was one of those kids that, when I went off to college and started being more on my own, I kind of got away from that, didn't really think much about it. I would have labeled myself as a Christian, but not, I don't even say I wouldn't have told people that, I'm a non-practicing Christian. That the concept didn't that's just how I grew up. When I started going to PT school, things started getting really rough because I was just studying, and it was a more intense thing for me to do. And I just remember one day just breaking down crying, just, why am I working so hard? And I was kind of talking to God. It's like, why am I working so hard? What's the point of me, busting my butt? Well, everybody else seems to be having a little bit of an easier time doing this. And up to that point, I would say the best friend that I had at PT school at that time, he had been inviting me to church. He wasn't pushing. He just, before every Sunday, he would give the invite, and I was kind of like, nah, that's okay. Well, for whatever reason, I finally took him up on his next invite after that incident of just breaking down. And it was a new experience for me. For me, I'd always been used to going to church that, it was big organs and there was a choir, and it was just kind of humdrum. This is the first time I'd ever been to a church where there were guitars and drums playing, and it kind of got me a little bit more engaged. The pamphlets that they handed out kind of had like blank sections for you to write in answers, so it helped me get more engaged with the church. And I remember one day he was just, at the end of the sermon, I went up to the pastor and I told him that I was having kind of this issue with, sometimes I just don't feel like I'm saved. I just don't feel like I'm walking with God. I don't know how to explain it, but I use the word feel. And he had a discussion with me, and he says, well, George, feeling's a lot like a caboose on a train. It's a part, but it's not what moves the thing. It's not a necessary part. And he kind of just explained to me how really it's faith is what really drives a person's relationship with God and Jesus. And I can't remember all the details of how he explained it to me. I just remembered him saying, Oh, I know what it was. I was just he basically listening to me. He was able to pinpoint. It's like, George, you're putting the cart before the horse. You're trying to be good enough to be saved rather than be saved and God working on you. And for whatever reason, at that moment, it clicked for me, and it was like a light bulb. I started crying. This was ugly crying. I mean, it was nasty. And I just said to him, it's like, I'm so sorry for all this. And this was the most poignant point. He said, like, I've never forgotten this. It's like, George, birth is a messy thing. He labeled that moment as me being born again, like getting it, understanding what I needed to do. And so for him, when he said that, I'm kind of like, that's when I would say everything turned around. And so I started wanting more and understanding more and learning more. Scripture started making more sense. I remember one time in church, it's kind of like we were doing baptism. It's like, oh, that's all about a testimony. Okay, it's like basically that's declaring to people openly that this is what I believe. It's like, I need to get that. I want to do that. I got to get that done. I want to make that public declaration. So it's just things that I'd never thought about before just started clicking. So that's I would say that's, for me, that's how I came to know God and Jesus rather than just to know about them.
So was there a realization that throughout that season of your life that Jesus was pursuing you and that he was inviting you into a relationship? Like, was there a realization that something was wrong in my life? Obviously, you talked about how there was a feeling element to what was happening. But were you realizing that there was a pursuit of Jesus after your heart?
I don't know if I would have called it so much a pursuit on his end. I would probably label it more like a prodigal son type of thing. Like I said, we grew up in church. I knew about God. I knew about Jesus. It was just things that I knew. Being honest, it's kind of like my parents took us to church. They understand that's what we needed in our life, but they kind of left it up to the church and Sunday school and things like that to really kind of instill it in us. It was never really part of our daily lives. I mean, so, God bless my parents. I'm grateful to God for the parents he gave me. I couldn't have asked for more loving parents. And I mean, I know really they didn't know because they were never really taught, how to, and I think that's a problem that a lot of people have. It's, you go through the motions, but you don't really know how to live it and apply it. So I kind of grew up as that's just part of my life. And, people joke, I had a drug problem growing up. My parents dragged me to church. They drugged me to church. And that's kind of what it was. I mean, I remember it was like, why do I need, it's 1 hour that I'm waking up early on a Sunday morning. Half the time I'm falling asleep in church anyway. Why can't I just be in my bed? Sometimes I'd fake being sick just because I didn't want to go. And of course, also, I know a lot of people say it's about, there's nothing but hypocrites in church, and I would agree. I saw how people acted in the church and how they acted on the outside. I'm like, it just wasn't, it didn't make any sense to me. It's like, what's the purpose of this? I mean, so it's kind of like I honestly believe God, kind of like with me, he knows how he's wired me. So he knows I kind of have to come to it at my own pace, but he will always nudge and direct me. So where it's like, I'm not going to get too far away or get into too much trouble. I think he just realized I had to reach that point that I was talking about earlier of just, why am I working so hard? What's the point of all this? What's the point of me working so hard? And I think it's like, now he's ready. I think he's like, he's not there yet. We kind of got to get him to this point before he's going to be receptive to anything. And so that's So it wasn't so much a pursuing as it was he was waiting on me to, like, fully leaven, however you if you want to put it that way, before I was ready to go.
Yeah, well, it sounds like he knew you, and we know this about him, but he knew you uniquely and in an intimate way where he knew exactly what you needed to come to that realization. What challenges or struggles did you face as Christ began opening your heart?
This is I wouldn't say as he began to open my heart, in the beginning, I don't think I faced too many struggles because, like I said, I was invited to church by my friend, my best friend. So, it kind of helped gave us another thing that we could relate to and talk to each other about and grow closer together. A lot of my other classmates, for me, PT school was my life for those 3 years when it started. I mean, that was my job. That's where I was 8 hours a day. So I really didn't have too much of a challenge in that sense, where I was getting a lot of pushback from people with how I was living my life and what I was talking about. Now, as time went on and I started reading more and praying more and understanding things more, I started, thinking about other individuals, like, members in my family and all that. And I tried to have conversations with them, but it just didn't flow. It wasn't really organic. It's almost kind of like, when I look back, what I was doing was, it's like I was looking for them to give me the answers I wanted to hear, rather than having just a discussion with them. And so when I tried to, I guess, push in that area, that's kind of when I would be getting a little bit of pushback. And I mean, even one of my brothers was like, just stop talking to me about this. It was like, okay. Yeah. And the men in my family, we love each other. We just never really talked about our feelings. So kind of getting into this type of area is probably it just made them feel uncomfortable.
What was so compelling about Jesus? Maybe why did you finally say yes to his authority and kingship in your life?
I don't know if it was anything necessarily compelling. Like I said, I grew up learning about Jesus. I knew what he had done. I heard the stories, how he sacrificed himself. I think when I finally came to accept Christ, like I said, as that pastor had explained to me, I was trying to be good enough to be saved. So I guess when I realized, and what it clicked for me was, you got it backwards. He's going to take you as you are, and then he's going to work on you. It's like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to earn my way in. Like, you don't have to get your way into college. You don't have to earn your way into PT school. He takes me as I am, then makes me what I need to be. And so I think that's where I didn't have to try so hard, and I don't have to be perfect. And even if I keep making mistakes, I can't undo. He won't kick me out. Once I'm in, and that always and that's one of the verses, and I'm horrible with telling you where it is, but the verse where it says, nothing can pluck me from his hand. That includes me. There's nothing I can do short of, like, saying, I'm jumping out of your hand. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. There's nothing I can do that. So it was kind of just a sense of relief that he's got this. I mean, I joked around for the longest time, why can't I have an instruction manual for life? I'm one of those rule followers. I can read a manual. I know how to follow a manual. And then once I accepted Christ, it's like, oh, it's right here. It's called the Bible.
It sounds like there was head knowledge, but it hadn't sunk down at the heart level yet.
Yeah. So I had the book knowledge. I know I had, I was aware, but what to do with it, I didn't really fully understand.
Would you say that the invitation that he had given cost you anything through this process?
It didn't really cost me people in my life, I don't want to say it cost me peace, and I'll kind of explain that, but in a sense, it did kind of cost me some peace, because being aware of what's going on and what's eventually going to happen, I am now concerned about the welfare of other people. And I mean, I have Jewish friends, and I mean, they're my best friends. But knowing that they don't have that relationship with Christ, that uneasiness, I'm aware. So it cost me the bliss of ignorance. Let me just put it that way.
Interesting. How would you define how your identity has changed since saying yes to Jesus?
Well, now when I call myself a Christian, I have a better understanding of what that means. It's not just, oh, that's where I go every Sunday. I mean, that's what he does on his weekends, as far as, what God he's praying to. It's kind of just helped me with how to make decisions about things, like how I need to respond and react. And do I get it right all the time? No, but I have a guide. I mean, and some things, when you read the Bible, it's like, well, what's this really talking about? But the things that, I think on a day-to-day basis, it has made clear, like, how I should live my life. And again, I'm not perfect. I don't always follow it, but I have a reference. So I am a Christian, and I think some of the best, there were especially early on, I think when I was probably a little bit more on fire at, like, anytime a new Christian is birthed. And I actually, I can't even say that, because I don't think I'm any less on fire. I just remember there have been moments where people would just comment, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" It's like, yeah, I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. It's just like, well, how did you know? It's like, I could just tell. I'm like, so obviously it's guided me with how I walk, how I live my life, how I interact with others. But other than that, I don't think it's changed me, because at the same time, God made me. He stitched me together. He wired me. He knows, how I act, how I think is what he intended. But he's making me more of what he intended me to be before I was born into sin. So I'm now becoming more of the George he intended to be.
On the post end of this event, or this period of your life, you knew at the head level that what God had done in sacrificing his son, but maybe at the heart level, what was the maybe emotional experience that you had gone through, now fully understanding, like, man, I knew at my head level that Jesus went to the cross for me, but now I understand this fully at such a deeper level than just knowing that he went to the cross for me. Having understood that now more fully, how did that impact your relationship with Jesus?
Just understand, honestly, it helped me understand that there is a love that I just can't fully comprehend. I mean, he, despite how I am, how I was before, and I wouldn't have said I was hostile towards him. I was just more aloof, just eh. But the fact that he didn't give up on me, that he was just, his timing's perfect. He was just waiting for the right moment. That level of patience, that level of forgiveness, that level of grace and mercy, it's kind of like, I can't fully understand that, because I mean, I know there are times where I still get frustrated with people and I don't want to give them grace and mercy, but the fact that no matter, despite how I was acting, and he could have just as easily given up on me. It's like, well, not worth it, move on to the next person, but he didn't. So the fact that he was willing to put that much effort into it, being saved now, I see that everything that I do in trying to obey him and follow him, it's not a way of me earning my salvation. I'm doing whatever I can to as a gesture of thanks. Why are you acting this way? Because Jesus did this for me. So this is at least the least I can do to thank him for what he's done.
How does your relationship with Jesus affect your life now?
It's pretty much just what I try, and that's the key word, try to use as my guide for how to act, how to think, how to have relationships with other people. He's kind of like, he's God's son, I'm God's adopted son. That makes him my brother. So, because he was the first to die and come back to life, then, he's my example. He's my big brother. He's the one I'm looking up to. He's the one I'm going to, asking for, what am I supposed to do?
Last question as we wrap up. Who is Jesus to you?
So as I mentioned a little bit before, I see him as a big brother. I see him as a friend. I see him as my king. I'm seeing him as my savior. He's all of those things. I guess he's the one that I want to thank the most and do my best to not disappoint, even though I know if it was somebody else, that was in his place and was human, they would be disappointed. Obviously, things don't catch him off guard, but even if I disappointed him, he's not going to give up on me. So, I not just a king and a savior and a brother and a friend, but he's my teacher. He walks me through, emotional things, helps me through physical things. He's all those things that the Bible says that he is: healer, teacher, king. So I guess honestly, if I wanted to, I could say that he's everything to me.